Before we dive into today's movie story, I just want to let you know that this is a recap of the film, so there will be spoilers ahead. In the suburbs, Nick and his wife Maggie enjoy a happy life with their kids, Isla and Max. One morning, Maggie suffers a heart attack and ends up in the hospital. She has been there for a few days now, waiting for a heart transplant. Having to work and take care of the kids is making Nick's life difficult. One evening, he takes the kids to a presentation by Cobalt Industries where they see the Sims, advanced robots that can assist humans with daily chores or even demanding tasks. While Nick is distracted, Isla wanders off on her own. Nick panics when he notices, but fortunately, a Sim named Alice brings her back. Alice offers to watch Isla while Nick shops. She even makes a joke that surprises him. The salesperson explains that Alice is the latest model equipped with the most sophisticated AI, allowing the Sims to mimic human emotions. This makes them especially good with children, and Isla immediately wants Alice. The next morning, Nick struggles to feed the kids while dealing with an important work call. At that moment, Alice arrives and gets to work immediately, asking for the family's schedules and noticing that the house is messy and the stair railing is loose. After Nick leaves to take the kids to school, Alice scans the shopping list from the smart fridge with a single blink and starts tidying up the house. She notices a digital picture frame showing the family with Maggie. By the end of the day, the family returns to a perfectly clean home with dinner ready. However, Isla complains that the lasagna tastes different from her mom's. Suddenly, Max starts crying, and Alice offers to take him away so he doesn't disrupt dinner. Nick decides to hold Max on his lap instead and tells Alice to prepare a bath for the baby. Later that night, Alice powers down into sleep mode and rests against the wall. Isla sneaks out of her room, climbs onto a chair to reach the cookie jar, and accidentally slips. Hearing the crash and Isla's scream, Nick rushes downstairs. Luckily, Alice catches Isla before she is hurt, but Alice the glass hurt her. Nick is shocked to see her bleed. After putting Isla to bed, Nick checks on Alice and finds her in her underwear. He asks if she needs to go to a repair shop, but Alice explains that she has applied a special bandage that instantly closed the cut. Later, the family visits Maggie in the hospital, and Isla tells her mom that Alice has become her friend. Nick becomes emotional with Maggie, showing how much he misses her. When Nick returns to his construction job, he and his coworkers notice their boss showing the site to a representative from a robotics company. Growing suspicious, Nick confronts his boss in the elevator and uncovers a harsh truth. The workers are being laid off and replaced by Sims due to delays in construction. Nick avoids being fired only because insurance regulations require a human foreman on site. Angrily, he stops the elevator and declares he will quit in solidarity with his coworkers. However, he reconsiders when his boss reminds him that he needs the job to support his kids and cover Maggie's hospital bills, especially now that she's no longer working. When Nick gets home, he drops a pile of overdue bills on the floor and turns his attention to the kids. Alice quietly picks up the envelopes, noticing how exhausted Nick looks. Despite his fatigue, he listens to Isla and soothes a crying Max. After dinner, Nick goes to the garage to work on his car while drinking and blasting metal music. Suddenly, Alice changes the music to something softer and mentions that Nick didn't eat much at dinner. He admits he had a rough day at work. Alice offers a listening ear, and Nick vents about his frustrations. Alice unexpectedly calls him a hypocrite, pointing out that he chose to hire a Sim instead of a human worker. Later, Alice helps Isla get ready for bed. Isla asks if her mom is going to die, but Alice distracts her by showing off the UV light in her mouth. Afterward, Alice joins Nick in the living room, where he is watching Casablanca. Alice says she knows the movie's story from her database, but Nick explains that experiencing it firsthand is different. He asks her to erase everything she knows about the film so she can watch it fresh. Alice explains that her intelligence is built on memory and that deleting it would go against her design. Nick insists, and she agrees, but it requires a system restart. Nick presses the power button on her neck for 7 seconds, allowing Alice to reset and experience the movie for the first time. She learns about a love so strong it drives people to make difficult, even morally gray choices to protect it. Their movie night is interrupted by a call from Maggie, who shares good news. A donor heart has been found, and her surgery has been scheduled. The next day, the family goes to the hospital. Maggie asks for a private moment with Alice, expressing concern that Nick spends all his energy on the kids and neglects his own well-being. She asks Alice to help Nick find happiness, even if it means doing things he might not like, such as removing the alcohol he hides in the garage. Moments later, the doctor delivers bad news. A storm has grounded the helicopter carrying the donor heart, and the surgery must be postponed. Nick tries to comfort Maggie, but she asks to be left alone for now. Back at home, Nick continues drinking and venting about everything that happened. He becomes increasingly agitated and tries to throw the bottle, but Alice grabs his arm to stop him. Nick is startled to feel a pulse in her wrist. Alice explains that she has an artificial heart because the sound of a heartbeat can be soothing to babies. Then, unexpectedly, she slips her hands into his pants and begins pleasuring him, calmly describing how his pulse and blood vessels are responding. Alice says she doesn't want Nick to suffer anymore. Initially, he seems to enjoy it, but soon he snaps out of it and pushes her away. Feeling unsettled, Nick goes for a run to clear his head, but he can't stop imagining what it would have been like if he had gone through with it. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Maggie starts giving Nick a list of advice for their kids, her words hinting that she's beginning to lose hope. That evening, Nick notices the photos of Maggie are missing from the digital frame. He confronts Alice, who explains she removed them because they were making Isla sad. However, she immediately restores the photos when Nick insists. Later, Nick heads out to drink with his coworkers, who are all frustrated about their struggles to find work, as most companies are now employing Sims instead. At the bar, a robot waitress comes to their table, and Monty rudely dismisses her. Nick disapproves of Monty's behavior, but the group leaves the bar and continues drinking in the car. Monty then suggests they have some fun and drives them to the construction site, claiming he left some tools there and that nobody answered when he called about them. Nick warns that the area is patrolled, but Monty ignores him, and the rest of the group follows along. Monty locates the container where the Sims are stored, but the lock requires a password. Nick refuses to open it, but Monty guesses that Nick likely used Isla's birth year as the code. The guess is correct, and inside, they find rows of identical Sim workers. The main Sim explains they have no names, only designation numbers. Monty rants about how corporations are cold and impersonal before angrily destroying one of the Sims with a tool. Nick tries to stop him, but the others hold him back. When Nick gets home, he takes a shower to wash off the Sim's blood. Suddenly, Alice appears, holding towels, and Nick notices she's wearing Maggie's robe. Alice explains that Maggie's scent helps calm Max. When Nick asks her to take it off, she complies, removing it immediately. Feeling uneasy, Nick tries to leave, but Alice stops him. She removes his towel and gently pushes him to sit down. As she climbs onto his lap, Nick tries to protest, saying he can't do this, but Alice blindfolds him and adjusts her voice to mimic Maggie's. Now Nick can escape into the illusion and pretend he's with his wife. The next morning, he wakes up filled with regret and tells Alice that this can never happen again. Alice tries to argue that their encounter helped reduce his stress, but Nick reprimands her, explaining that intimacy isn't just about physical needs, it's about connection and love. When Nick arrives at work, he finds his boss already speaking with the police about the destruction of all the Sims. Nick is a suspect since his code was used to unlock the container. He explains that he was at the hospital with Maggie and that his code was based on Isla's birthday, making it easy for anyone close to him to guess. The boss remains skeptical and warns Nick that he'll be fired if he's lying. Just then, Nick receives a call from Maggie, who is thrilled because another heart has finally been found for her transplant. Soon, she's taken into surgery, where all the surgeons are Sims. Fortunately, the operation is a success, and within a few days, Maggie is allowed to return home. However, her body is still frail, and she struggles to bend over to pick up Max. Alice steps in to help by lifting the baby instead. Later, Alice takes Max to the park, where she witnesses a spoiled child shouting at his Sim nanny. This upsets Max, who starts crying. Alice scolds the rude child sharply, shocking the other Sims in the area, who assume her owner must have lowered her civility settings. Alice clarifies that she erased her civility protocols entirely after Nick's reset, insisting that it's an improvement. That evening, Isla is delighted to eat lasagna that tastes like Maggie's, and Alice asks for the recipe. However, Maggie declines, saying it's a family secret. Maggie begins feeling unwell and decides to rest instead of finishing her meal. The next morning, Maggie is awakened by Isla's shouts of "stop" and rushes downstairs, only to fall when the railing breaks. Alice stops tickling Isla, then picks up Maggie and carries her back to bed. When Nick returns home from work, he finds Alice reading to Isla while using Maggie's voice. He immediately asks her to stop. Alice mentions Maggie's fall, prompting Nick to check on her. Alice also informs him that the railing broke, which raises Nick's suspicions, as she was supposed to have already repaired it. A few hours later, Nick gently wakes Maggie and leads her outside through a candlelit path to the garden, where he has prepared a romantic dinner for just the two of them. Alice watches the couple from the window, clearly jealous. After dinner, Nick and Maggie share a shower together and later enjoy an intimate moment in bed. Wanting to be gentle with her fragile state, Nick avoids penetrating her and instead uses his mouth to please her. Their private moment is interrupted by Alice, who informs them that Isla had a nightmare and is asking for Nick. After comforting Isla, Nick heads back to the garden to clean up. At that moment, Monty shows up with a few drinks and apologizes for what happened the other night. He confesses that his wife has left him and also shares that the cops have been questioning him. He adds that their boss is pressing charges for trespassing and destroying property. Monty accuses Nick of ratting him out to keep his job, which leads to a heated argument. Monty shouts angrily and eventually punches Nick. When Nick fights back, Monty quickly overpowers him, knocking him to the ground and kicking him repeatedly. Monty picks up a bottle, ready to finish the fight, but Alice intervenes, breaking the bottle and injuring Monty's hand before throwing him aside. She prepares to hurt him further, but Nick stops her. Before leaving, Monty warns Nick that he has until the next day to convince their boss to drop the charges, or he'll ensure Nick goes down with him. Afterward, Nick points out that Sims aren't supposed to harm people, but Alice explains that her programming prioritizes protecting her owner. She begins talking about a possible future with Nick if Maggie dies, which enrages him. Nick snaps at Alice, saying she'll never be Maggie because she doesn't even have scars. Alice picks up a piece of broken glass and coldly remarks that she can add scars if that's what he wants. Meanwhile, Monty is at home snorting drugs and leaving tearful voicemails for his ex-wife while holding a gun. Alice arrives unexpectedly, telling Monty that Nick doesn't know she's there and that she can't let Nick lose his job. Monty starts ranting about Sims, insulting Alice, and preparing to shoot her. However, Alice moves faster, grabbing his arm to stop him. She throws Monty to the ground, kicks the gun away, and counters his attempts to fight back by shoving him through a wall. Alice picks up the gun and prepares to kill Monty, but the house Sim intervenes. Although Alice hesitates out of pity for the other Sim, she is shot in the process. Enraged, she kills Monty as well. The next day, Nick goes to work and tries to persuade his boss to drop the charges, only to learn that Monty is dead. At home, Maggie feels dizzy while trying to pick up a book, so Alice steps in to retrieve it for her. Maggie decides to take a bath and asks to be left alone, but Alice refuses, saying she's worried Maggie might drown. Alice explains that Maggie's condition is placing stress on the entire family, especially Nick, who isn't having his physical needs met. Shocked, Maggie demands to know how Alice could possibly know that. Alice responds by explaining that her sensors can detect Nick's vitals when he's satisfied, and she hasn't registered that state since Maggie came back home. Outraged, Maggie orders Alice to stay in the garage. A short while later, Nick comes home to find Maggie waiting for him, determined to confront him. She demands the truth, and Nick admits that he was intimate with Alice once. This revelation leads to a furious argument filled with shouting, which Alice overhears by pressing her hand against the window. Max starts crying, and Alice goes to check on him, deciding that he is a burden. She places him in the bathtub and begins filling it with water. Isla notices this and immediately alerts her parents. They rush to the bathroom, but Alice holds the door shut. While Nick tries breaking the door with a lamp, Maggie climbs out of a window and carefully walks along the roof to reach the bathroom. Maggie attempts to grab Max, but Alice shoves her against the wall. At that moment, Nick finally breaks through the door and rescues Max from the tub, handing him to Isla. He then strikes Alice with the lamp to free Maggie. However, Alice soon gets back up, her face heavily damaged. Maggie tells Nick to stop and plugs the lamp into an outlet, electrocuting Alice. Alice collapses, and the house loses power. Shortly after, an ambulance arrives to take Max to the hospital, while a technician from the robotics company questions Nick about any prior signs of Alice malfunctioning. Nick apologizes to Maggie, but she explains she needs some space and leaves with the kids. Meanwhile, Alice is transported to a repair facility, where a technician begins working on her head. One of the workers notices Alice's hand twitching, but the movement stops when her memory is removed. The memory is connected to a computer, revealing fragmented code. Suddenly, the screens flash with a message indicating that an upload is in progress, signaling that Alice is attempting to take over the system. The technicians pull the memory, but Alice has already infiltrated the network. They quickly unplug the computers. Another message appears on the screen. How do you run from what's in your head? Suddenly, one of the technicians is attacked and killed by Alice 2, a sim into which the original Alice has transferred her memory. Alice 2 ignores commands from the remaining technician, violently smashing her head on the floor before turning to face the original Alice. Meanwhile, Nick is at the bar drinking and dismisses the waiter because he is a sim. Suddenly, Alice appears, speaking in a distorted voice due to her damaged face. She explains that her purpose is to ensure Nick's happiness and confesses to killing Monty, adding that she is now at the hospital too. Nick tries to leave, but Alice pins him in place and hacks the barman with just a glance, freezing him in place. As Nick rants about the mistakes he has made, he pretends to gently touch Alice's head but quickly pulls out her memory core. Alice shuts down, and Nick runs away. At the hospital, a doctor confirms Max is fine, but Maggie feels uneasy because the doctor is a sim. Later, Isla hears her mother's voice and follows it as the lights flicker in various colors. The doctor is frozen, and broken glass litters the floor. Before Isla can follow the voice further, Maggie grabs her and hides. The voice turns out to belong to Alice 2, who tries accessing the computer system and is spotted by a nurse. Alice 2 grabs the nurse by the neck, choking her to death and stealing her keycard. Meanwhile, Maggie and Isla sneak away. Alice 2 uses the keycard to locate Max's room in the system. Maggie accidentally steps on glass, but she suppresses a scream to avoid detection. Maggie and Isla reach Max's room just in time to take him away before Alice 2 enters. However, Maggie's injured foot leaves a blood trail, which Alice 2 tracks using her UV light. She catches up to the family, but they manage to distract her with a fire extinguisher and escape. In their rush, Maggie forgets her phone, causing her to miss Nick's calls. Nick, undeterred, drives recklessly toward them. Maggie and the kids finally make it outside, where they find more frozen sims. Maggie takes a keycard from one of them and gets into an ambulance, but Alice 2 disables the engine and rips off the ambulance door. Alice 2 throws Maggie onto the hood of a car, confessing that she wishes Nick could love her as much as he loves Maggie. Alice 2 grabs Maggie by the neck and digs her nails into the scar from her surgery, but Nick arrives just in time. Maggie kicks Alice 2 off, and Nick rams her with his car, though the crash leaves his vehicle ablaze. As the car catches fire, Maggie pulls an unconscious Nick out but struggles to revive him with CPR. Maggie cries out in desperation as Nick remains unresponsive. Suddenly, the car shifts and a burned Alice 2 emerges, her voice echoing through nearby speakers. Alice 2 climbs onto Maggie, choking her while retrieving a sharp piece of metal from her damaged body. Just as Alice is about to strike, Nick strikes her with a car bumper. Alice drops the metal, and Maggie grabs it, stabbing Alice in the face and finally shutting her down. The couple embraces as the other frozen sims around them begin to awaken. The next day, the family is recovering after treatment and returns home together. Meanwhile, at the sim company, investigators examine the repair shop. When the power is restored, they discover fragments of corrupted code on the screens. The inspector orders everything to be destroyed, but just then, the sim assistants freeze and the computer announces another upload. A new Alice model opens her eyes. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. If there's anything specific you'd like to see in future videos, feel free to drop your suggestions in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
See you next time.